tree was doing work no tree was made for. I saw it from the forebay of the low-water bridge where Tolliver Hollow lets out onto the 11 Point. A white oak leaning off the bluff with something folded into the fork of it 30 feet up. And the something was the size of a yearling steer, and it was dead. That was the first plain fact of that October. A dead thing lodged in the standing oak like laundry hung out by a giant, and the river running clear and cold beneath it and saying nothing about how it got there. I had been a ranger in that district 11 years. Folks in that country called us park rangers, and not one of us ever troubled to correct them. Mark Twain National Forest, 11 Point Ranger District, the karst country of Oregon County, Missouri, where the ground is hollow under you more often than it is not, and the springs run out of the hills like the hills are bleeding clear water. I knew what a flood could hang in a tree. Cattle one spring, and a porch swing out of Riverton. But the river had not been up since April. The gauge at Bardley had sat low all summer. Whatever put that weight in that oak had carried it up there. I stood on the bridge a long while. Then I drove up to the station at Winona and got Dane Whitmer and a rope and came back. Dane was younger than me and heavier, and he did not talk much, which I counted a virtue in a man you spend whole days with in a truck. He stood under the oak with his head back and his hands on his hips. "Bear," he said. "Maybe. Big boar bear. Crawled up and died." Bears don't die in the fork of a tree with their back broke around it. He looked at me. "You want to say what does that then?" I did not want to say anything. We rigged the rope and I climbed the low limbs and got a strap on it, and we lowered it down, and it came heavy and stiff and wrong, and when it lay on the gravel bar we stood away from it without either of us deciding to. It was no bear. It had the hide of a boar gone gray at the shoulders, and the frame of something built to stand upright, and it was burned down to half of what it should have weighed, the way a thing looks when the fat of it is gone. I will not say all of what I saw. It had long hands. Old men in that country used to say a skinned bear looks like a man, and that is true, and this was not that. The mouth in front of its head was a man's kind of mouth. What sat behind that was not. Something had opened it up and taken what it wanted with a neatness I had seen in no animal, no cat and no bear. And then it had carried the rest up a standing oak and wedged it in the fork the way a shrike pins a grasshopper to barbed wire. A cache. A larder. Whatever had done it planned to come back. "We call this in," Dane said. "Call it in as what?" He did not answer that. The light was going long and yellow down the river, and the bluff above us stood 200 feet of gray dolomite, with cedars rooted in the seams of it, and cold air came off the cave mouths up there and slid down over us with a smell in it like wet rock and old pennies. I got the tarp from the truck. That spring I had been bitten by a feral dog on a fire road south of Thomasville. That is what I wrote in the incident report, and that is what I told the nurse at the clinic in Alton. And she gave me the shots and taped my forearm and told me to watch for redness. The scar it left was longer than a dog's mouth. I did not measure it against anything. It had been quiet all summer, and that week it had commenced to ache like a green stick bent double. And I stood on that gravel bar in the dusk with the tarp in my hands and my arms singing, and I put it down to the weather turning. I will say one more thing about that fall, because it belongs to the telling even if I did not see then where it belonged. I had a blue-tick hound named Belle that had ridden every road in that district in the bed of my truck since she was a pup, and since spring she would not ride with me. She was well. She ate and she slept on the porch, and when my neighbor came by she near turned herself inside out with gladness. She just would not come to me anymore. She would stand at the far corner of the yard and watch me the way stock watches a gate that has come open. And I told myself dogs get strange when they get old, and she was not old. We loaded the carcass and hauled it to the station, and Marsh came out of his office and looked at it under the shop lights for a long time. Marsh was district ranger, near 60, a flat, quiet man out of Doniphan, who had held that job through 3 administrations and 2 floods of record. "Boar bear," he said. "Mange. Starved." "Marsh," I said. "That's what the report will say." "It's got hands, Marsh." He looked at me then, and his face gave up nothing whatsoever, and what it gave up was its own kind of information, though I read it wrong. I thought I was looking at a man protecting a tourism season. Floaters and trout money, half the county's living. I thought that for a good while, and I was wrong about it the way you can only be wrong about a thing you are certain of. "You been sleeping?" he said. "What's that got to do with anything? You look like a man that's not been sleeping." He put the shop light out. "Tolliver Hollow's closed as of tonight. Slide gate, both ends. You'll ride it tomorrow and pull any camps." "Why me?" "Because it's your compartment," he said, and walked back inside. And that was true, and it was not the reason, and both of those facts sat in the dark of that shop with me a long time before I understood either one. I drove home after. Where the county road tops out above Cane Bluff, there is a gap in the timber, and you can see back down the whole run of the hollow in the last light. And I stopped there. I could not tell you why. The moon stood half-lit and growing over the far ridge, a week off filling out. Down on the rim of the bluff, a half-mile off, something stood against the sky. I took it first for a snag. Then it turned its head. It was tall past what the distance could excuse, and it was narrow through the shoulders the way nothing heavy is narrow, and it did not move off the way a bear moves off, or stand dumb the way a deer stands. It watched me the way a man watches. Longer than a man. Long enough that I was the one who looked away first, and when I looked back it was gone and the rim was bare rock, and I sat there with my scarred arm aching on the wheel, and the last of the daylight going out of the west, and the hollow going dark below me like water filling a boot. In the morning I went in. The gates were shut like Marsh said, and I ran the hollow road at first light with the frost still standing in the shadows of the cuts. There were 2 camps on the permit book. The first was a pair of bow hunters out of Springfield at the Boliden Ford, and they were already packed when I got there. And they did not ask me why the closure, and I did not offer. And the older one looked up the hollow once while they loaded, and then did not look again. The second camp was empty. Tent standing, fire ring cold 2 days at least, a bass boat cooler with the food gone out of it, and the lid set back on square. No pack, no boots. A pickup with Carter County plates sat at the trailhead with pine needles in the wiper wells. I wrote the tag number in my book and stood in that camp listening to the hollow, and the hollow gave me back nothing but crows way off toward the river. I called it in. Marsh took the tag number and was quiet a moment on the radio, and then he said, "That'll be Ledbetter's nephew. He goes off like this. I'll handle the county." And I keyed up to say a man's gear standing in a closed hollow wanted more than handling, and I did not say it, because you did not say such things to Marsh. And that habit of not saying is how a man gets steered a long way down a wrong road without once feeling the wheel turn. I spent that day and the next riding the compartment. I found where something had crossed the fire road below Grassy Pond, brush laid over in a swath like a truck had left the roadbed. I followed that swath a quarter-mile up the slope and came out where 2 cedars had been pushed clean out of the rock, root wad and all, and thrown downhill into the pond, so that their tops stood out of the water at an angle like men who had gone in and not come up. Cedar grows out of that limestone with a grip a winch will not break. I stood at the edge of the water and looked at them a while and did not go closer, and I did not put a hand on anything, and I got back in the truck. The woods around that pond had the quiet that woods get under a hawk, every small thing pressed flat and waiting, only there was no hawk, and the quiet went out in a circle bigger than any hawk could throw. The third day I went to see Otho Vance. He had a place up a dry branch off the Fremont Road, 80 acres of rock and cedar his family had held since before the forest came, and the government line ran around his ground on 3 sides like water around a stone. He was past 80. He had trapped and cut cedar posts in that country all his life, and there were things he knew that were not written anywhere, and never would be. He was splitting stovewood when I drove in, and he was doing it slow, and he did not stop until I was out of the truck. Then he stood the axe against the block and looked at me a longer time than was mannerly. "You hurt your arm," he said. I had my sleeve down. There was no bandage anymore, had not been since June. "Back in the spring," I said. "Dog bit me." "Whose dog?" "Stray, down toward Thomasville." He looked at me with his eyes gone narrow under the white brush of his brows, and then he looked away up the branch at nothing, and something went across his face and settled, some old arithmetic being done and coming out where he had reckoned it would. "Come up on the porch," he said. We sat, and he did not offer coffee, and that was itself a thing, for he always had. I told him about the oak and what was hung in it. I told him about the cedars and the pond. I did not tell him about the rim of Cane Bluff, and he watched me not tell it. My granddad called it the lean man, he said. Folks now would call it something off the television. It don't come often. It follows something, the way wolves follow the elk. When the thing it follows gets thick in a country, it comes, and it eats till the country's thinned out, and it goes. He worked his thumbnail into a check in the porch board. It was here in 1931, before me. My granddad and 3 other men shut the mouth of a cave up Tolliver with mule sleds of rock, and whether that done anything or whether it had ed its fill and left on its own, ain't nobody can say. They took mules in to do that work. There ain't much of that hollow a mule could get to, then or now. What does it follow, Otho? He was quiet so long I thought his mind had gone off the way old men's minds go off. Out past the barn lot his 2 hounds lay in the sun, and they had not barked at me when I drove in, and they had not come to me either. They lay with their heads up watching me across the lot and their ears back flat. Werewolves, he said. He said it the way he would have said turkeys or shoats. Plain, like a man naming what is in the woods because he has to live next to what is in the woods. That thing hung in your oak, he said. Was it a man or was it a beast? You looked at it. You couldn't say, could you? Both and neither. That's them caught part way. There's been such in these hills longer than there's been Vances, and there's been Vances a good while. They ain't thick most times. Most times they keep to themselves and mind their own trouble, and a man could live his whole life on the next ridge and never know. But they've got thick lately. Something's drawed them in from other places, and the lean man come in behind them like a cat behind mice. It don't want you. He looked at me. It wants them. A plain man ain't worth the carry. It caches what it catches, and it works a country in a circle till the circle's empty. I heard my own voice ask it before I had decided to. How does it know them? From plain folks, before they turn. Smell, I reckon, Otho said. Same way you know a walnut from a hickory in the dark. They smell of what's in them. And then he did the thing I have turned over more nights since than I will admit. He reached across and took my wrist, my right wrist, below the scar, and he held it a moment the way a man holds a hoe he is thinking of buying. And he looked at me with something in his face I took that day for pity. You ought not be in that hollow when the moon fills out, he said. That's Friday. Driving out his branch in the falling dark, I had it all built in my head, and it built itself so easy. The bite in the spring, Belle standing off from me in the yard, the hounds flat-eared in the lot, my arms singing when the weather turned, when the moon turned, Marsh watching me under the shop lights, asking had I been sleeping. I laid every plank of it myself and walked out on it and felt it bear my weight. I thought I knew now what was in me. I thought the lean man had stood on that rim at a half-mile in the dark and looked at all the country it had to hunt in, and had smelled the one thing it wanted, and that thing was driving a green Forest Service truck with its window down. At the blacktop I sat with the motor running. North was home, and my porch, and my dog that would not come to me. South was the station, and past the station the hollow, shut behind its gates, holding a standing tent and an empty cooler, and a cave that 4 men had walled shut before my father was born. I turned south. It was 4 days till the moon filled out. I meant to use them. I did not wait the 4 days. A man who believes a thing is coming up in him like water in a well does not sit and watch it rise. I spent 2 days on the district's business so Marsh would see me at it, and on the 3rd day, with the moon 1 night short of full, I walked into Tolliver Hollow from the ridge side where there was no gate to log me through, and I carried the .45-70 my father had left me, and a coil of rope and a carbide light, and I told no one. The cave was not on the survey, and Otho never told me where it lay. He gave me 2 things without meaning to, and I put them together myself on the drive home and again at my kitchen table half the night. The men in 1931 had brought mules in, and a mule will not work ground a man will scramble over. And a cave big enough to be worth walling shut sits in a bluff face, not in a sink. There is one bluff in Tolliver that a mule sled could be got to, and it stands above the sinkhole pond, with the wet weather branches running down to it out of the rock. I had ridden that compartment 11 years, and I had never once had a reason to walk up the 3rd branch. I found it by noon. The country in there was as rough as any in the district. house-sized breakdown all through the bottoms, and the cedars growing out of it sideways. And I went slow, and the woods went with me in that flattened silence I had come to know, moving where I moved like the hole in a sock. I smelled the place before I saw it. Wet rock and old pennies, the same cold breath that had slid down over Dane and me on the gravel bar, and under it something older and closer that I have no word for and want none. The bluff stood up out of the breakdown with its face in shadow, and there at the base was the rockwork, the stones the mules had brought in 90 years back, squared chert and dolomite laid up dry like a chimney for a house nobody would ever build. The top third of it was down. The stones lay tumbled out from the mouth in a fan, some of them stones that two men together would not lift, and lichen grew on every face of them but the faces they had broken on, and those were bright. They had not been pulled down from without. They lay the way water lies when it has been thrown from a bucket. I stood a long time hearing my own blood. Then I lit the carbide and went in over the fan of rock, because the well was rising in me and I meant to look at the bottom of it while I was still the one doing the looking. The passage went back level and dry and bigger than a barn hall. What was cached in it I will say plainly and briefly. They were all of them the same kind of thing. Some had gone all the way to beast before the end, and hung in the high seams, dried and neat, with no piece of them wasted or scattered, a smokehouse kept by something patient. And there were others that had not gone anywhere at all, men and women in their own clothes, and it was the clothes that took the strength out of my knees. Flannel and duck canvas and one blaze orange vest. However they had died as folks. The lean man did not care what shape its meat wore. It knew what was inside. Nothing else was in that cave. No deer, no hog, not so much as a squirrel bone on the floor. It had walked past every other living thing in that hollow to fill its larder with the one kind, and standing there with the light shaking in my hand, I understood that Otho had told me the truth about what it hunted, and I had not yet understood the rest of what he told me. The camper was alive. He was back in a side gallery, wedged up in a seam 10 feet off the floor, the way the thing in the oak had been wedged. Only he was breathing, and when my light found him, his eyes came open, and they were wrong in the way a dog's eyes throw light. And he said, in a voice worn down to the threads, "It keeps us till we turn. It likes us better after." I got the rope over a spur of flowstone above him, and climbed to him and worked him loose out of that seam, and it took a good while, and he could not help me much. He could not stand at first, and then he could, and he held my arm, and his hands were hot as stove iron, and the strength coming back into them was not a man's strength. He looked at my face and then at my forearm where the sleeve had ridden up, and he made a sound that was almost laughing. "You too," he said. "Then we'd best be quick. We're the sweetest thing in this hollow, friend, and it's been out a while." We came up the passage toward the gray shape of day, and the day went dark. It filled the mouth of that cave the way a stopper fills a jug. Tall past belief and narrow, hide gray as the boar thing's shoulders, and it folded itself through the tumbled rockwork with a patience that was worse than speed, and its face had that same doubleness the cached ones had, man in front and beast behind, as though it had eaten so many of both that it had settled into being the average of everything it ate. It looked at us the way it had looked at me across a half-mile of dark from the rim of Cane Bluff. Choosing. I fired the .45-70 into the middle of it at 10 feet. It took the bullet the way a river takes a stone. I worked the lever and put another one into it, and it did not so much as turn its head, and the sound of both shots went out of that cave mouth and was lost in all that rock. Then it had the camper. It did not rush. Its arm went out long, and the man was against the wall of the passage, and then he was quiet, and it was over that quick and that plain, and it turned its head to me, and I ran. I made the daylight and the breakdown field, and I did not get 30 yards. A stone rolled under me, and the hollow turned over, and I came up against a cedar with the rifle gone and my mouth full of the taste of metal, and the lean man came out of the cave mouth and down the fan of rock flat-footed and unhurried, the way it did all things, and I understood that everything it had let me do that fall, the finding of the oak and the closed gates and every last thing I had reasoned out for myself since, had been the patience of a thing that caches its meat and comes back when the meat is riper. It had smelled the spring bite on me at half a mile. It had been waiting on my moon. They came off the ridge behind me with no more sound than cloud shadow. I took the first for hounds, and they were not hounds. 4 of them, wolf-built but high as yearling colts, and one of them had gone gray at the muzzle and moved out ahead of the others with a flat, quiet authority I had been taking orders from for 11 years. And I knew him at once and past any doubting, though I could not tell you by what. The way you know a walnut from a hickory in the dark. They went by me and did not touch me, and they took the lean man in the breakdown with the sun going down the bluff face red and the cedars standing sideways out of the rock. I will not make an account of it. It was sudden where it was anything, and mostly it was work, dark, heavy work in the failing light, and twice the lean man threw one of them the way it had thrown the stones from the cave mouth, and twice that one got up. The gray-muzzled one never left its footing. He came at the thing's near side each time it turned, patient as it was patient, taking a little each time the way men take down a big oak, and the light went out of the hollow while they were about it, and the moon that was 1 night short of full stood up over the east rim and looked at all of it, and made nothing of it, and somewhere in the dark below the bluff the work came to its end. The country did not mark it. The spring kept running out from under the cave the whole time, cold and steady over the ledges, the way it had run through everything else that had ever happened in that hollow, and when the sound of the work stopped, there was just the water. The gray one came up through the breakdown to where I sat against my cedar. He was hurt and did not favor it. He stood over me and looked at me a long while with the moonlight coming into his eyes and going back out of them yellow, and there was nothing in his face at all, and this time I read that nothing right. It was a man deciding what a report would say. "Marsh," I said. He turned his head down the hollow, the way a man nods at his truck when it is time to go. I walked out of the hollow in the dark with the wolves around me like an escort or a custody. I could not have said which, and at the ridge road they were gone the way smoke goes, which is to say they quit being where they had been and no going was in it. And I drove home with my hands wrong on the wheel and slept in my clothes on top of the covers, and no dream came that I kept. Marsh was at the station in the morning in his own shape, at his desk with the door open and coffee going, and he had a bandage on his left hand and wore his sleeve down over the forearm above it. He looked up at me and his face held what it always held, which was none of him at all, and I stood in his doorway a long moment and neither of us made a start at anything. "Ledbetter's nephew," I said finally. "The camp at the trailhead. County's been notified. Left the country, most like. Folks do." He turned a paper over on the desk. "Tolliver stays closed through winter. Sinkhole activity. There's money coming for the rock work." The rock work. That old cave wall's a hazard, tumbled like it is. Crew from Rolla will lay it back up. Engineered this time. He said it the way he said everything, flat as a creek stone, and he looked at me while he said it, and I understood that I was being told the report, and that the report was for me the same as for anybody, and that this was a courtesy, and also a door being shut without hurry. I went out. My rifle was standing in the corner of the shop by the parts washer, cleaned and oiled, and the action worked smooth. And no one ever said one word to me about who had gone back into that breakdown field to get it. Dane was in the shop running new hydraulic line on the slide gate rig, and he had a limp he had not had on Tuesday, and he did not look up from his work, and I stood there a while watching him, and then I went and rode my compartment because it was mine. The Friday the moon filled out. I sat up for it on the porch steps with the 45-70 across my knees, not loaded. I had not been able to decide what I would want it loaded for, and the moon came up out of the timber east of the place, big and white, and it climbed all night over the pasture and nothing rose in me at all. My arm did not so much as ache. I sat there till the frost came down on my shoulders and the moon went small and high and lost its color, and I was only a man getting cold on his own steps, and somewhere along in the smallest hours I began to laugh, quiet, the way you laugh when the joke is on you and has been the whole time, and out at the corner of the yard Belle lifted her head off her paws and watched me do it. "Whose dog?" Otho had asked, first thing before I had told him anything at all. The word the old man picked was whose. I drove up his branch on a Sunday in November with the leaves all down and the country gone gray and open so you could see the bones of it. He was at the woodpile in the cold with the axe going slow, And he did not stop when I drove in, and he did not stop when I got out. I took up the maul that was leaning against the block and went to work on the big knotted rounds he had set aside because he could not break them anymore. And we made wood together a while, and neither of us said anything. His 2 hounds lay along the south wall of the barn in what sun there was, and watched us do it. And one of them thumped his tail on the boards when a round came apart, and that was the only sound in that lot besides the work. It was never in me, I said. No, it was on me. I set the maul down and pushed my sleeve back and held my arm out into the cold where he could see it. The scar had gone pale over the summer, and I had never once thought to wonder why a wound that would not quit aching would fade so quick. Like scent on a trap. You knew it when you took my wrist. That's why you told me to stay out of the hollow when the moon filled. Not for what I'd do, for what would come looking. Otho stood the axe against the block and left it there. A thing that hunts by what's inside, he said, can be lied to about what's inside. My granddad told it that the men in 31 had a bait dog. Said it plainer than that, but that was the sense of it. He looked at me for the first time since I had come up the branch. They'd have needed one that could walk the whole district and never think a thing of it. One with a reason to be on every road and up every branch. And they'd have needed it not to know, because the lean man can smell a lie the same as it smells the rest. The dog on the fire road south of Thomasville had come out of the timber straight and low and quiet, and it had taken my forearm and held it a count of 2 and let go and was gone. And I had stood there bleeding and thinking how strange, a stray that bites once and leaves. And I had driven myself to Alton and made my report, in the spring, when they had already begun to come into that country thick from other places, and the lean man had come in behind them. Marsh had 11 years of me riding that district like a tolling bell, and all he had to do was hang the right scent on the clapper. He could have asked me, I said. No, Otho said, he couldn't have. And that was all either of us said about it because it was true. The lean man would have smelled the knowing on me at half a mile and gone back to its patience, and its patience was longer than a county's worth of folks could afford. The old man picked the axe back up and set another round on the block, and I went back to the mall, and we finished the pile before the light went. I did not quit. I thought I would, and then deer season came and there were fools lost up every hollow and the work was the work. In December, the crew from Rolla laid the cave mouth back up with grouted stone and a steel bat gate. And Marsh stood watching them with his hands in his coat pockets, and I stood by him, and the cold came off the rock at us both alike. You'll have my compartment a long time yet, he said. You're good at it. I know why I'm good at it now. He watched the masons work. Man can know why he's good at a thing, he said, and go on being good at it. It was as near to the whole matter as he ever came, then or after. In March, Belle crossed the yard to my truck one morning and stood at the tailgate the way she had for 8 years, waiting on me to drop it. And I dropped it, and she loaded up. The scent had worn off me by then, whatever she had smelled all that year, wolf that was not me, lie that I had not known I was telling. I drove down through Riverton with her riding the bed and her ears up in the wind, and at the low water bridge I stopped like I sometimes do. The white oak still leans off the bluff at the mouth of Tolliver Hollow, with the fork of it empty now against the sky. Below it, the 11 Point came on out of the hills the way it came before there were rangers or Vances, or the lean man, or the ones the lean man fed on, running clear and cold over the chert, and it said nothing about any of them, and it went on south with the light on it, and it is running there now.